Strand, due to rich resources and investment from independent financiers rather than established mega-corporations, was inundated with mass immigration, with millions of people from across the Orion Confederacy seeking new employment and opportunities. However, as these resource rushes passed, the market stabilized, and Strand lost its frontier status. Many of these immigrants were left jobless and destitute and had since established families that couldn't leave to go elsewhere. With the rapid urbanization of the planet, these lost souls were forced to live in ghettos called sprawls, cheap, poorly maintained habitation complexes rife with crime, desolation, and decay. By far the largest of these sprawls were a series of hab complexes within Logan's Pass called the Drops, a name earned due to the presence of the tallest condo buildings found in the Strand sprawls and a disturbingly high defenestration occurrence rate. The Drops are defined, like most sprawls, due to the excessively high rate of crime and urban decay, with countless gangs, crime rings, mafia outfits, and other criminal elements setting up their bases of operation there, not to mention the vast amount of local petty criminals nor civilians who turn to theft and fraud in order to feed themselves and their families. Despite the Drops' less than sterling reputation, the people who live there, whether hardened criminals or desperate survivors, are known for possessing a deep pride in their community and sense of identity. To those who call the Drops their home, they are the people of the Drops first, before they are citizens of Logan's Pass and/or Strand. This is not an unusual ideology seen in other sprawls or ghettos, as the citizenry of the Drops are forced to rely on each other for support, rather than the indifferent care of the Confederacy or the megacorps. The only group outside of the Drops to gain the tenuous trust of its population are certain religious charity groups. The Proxy, created by Pierre Grange. Chapter 4. The Man with the Black Eyes. Winter ate her food slowly. The sensation was unfamiliar. She had memories, in third person of course, of eating various kinds of food, but that woman in those memories was growing more and more unfamiliar, if only that she wore far too many names and faces to ever be one person. The food was a burrito, of that she knew, but one of those that clearly was printed rather than grown, slaughtered, cooked and prepared. Too sweet and starchy, its texture rubbery. In a strange way, too healthy. It had been infused with additional vitamins and nutrients, but without all the little delicious imperfections and impurities of proper preparation, its taste was too safe and thus too bland. But it filled her well enough, she supposed. Besides, she needed help and was not going to snub any sent her way. Her help came in the form of the man with the black eyes and carbon hands, who called himself Scrimshaw. He had wordlessly given her the burrito while helping himself to one. He had said very little and chose to sit down on the foot of the bed to eat, and the bed being the only place to sit, though he did make sure to give her distance. He seemed to ignore her while he read an old, well-worn book. As they nibbled, the silence hung in the air between them like a foul odor. His response was automatic. He didn't move his head nor his eyes in her direction, at least as far as she could see. His eyes didn't possess any noticeable iris or pupil. It was just jet carbon black, no doubt cybernetic. The new silence made itself known. Winter found it uncomfortable.
Who are you?
I told you, my name is Scrimshaw.
Yes, but that doesn't really tell me anything.
Scrimshaw finally stopped reading, closing the book with a solid thud.
That is very interesting.
What is?
That you would be more interested in me than yourself.
Winter could not follow. It was clear to Scrimshaw what her thoughts were since he continued.
Normally, when someone undergoes epiphany and has finally allowed their brain to settle like you have, they are completely introspective. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? They would ask. But you don't. You ask about me.
Epiphany? What is epiphany?
Scrimshaw shifted and cleared his throat.
Simply put, it is when proxies gain consciousness. Last night you were wandering the Drops, completely zonked out. I saw you. The locals thought you were an F-toy.
F-toy?
Lady of the night, It is a local term.
Winter involuntarily shuddered while pulling a sheer of disgust, her eyes closed at the horrid scenario.
Yes, well, nothing bad happened if you are worried about that. When I saw you, I led you back here to my home. You just went in the direction I shifted you towards, while muttering the same thing. I want to go home. You fell asleep shortly afterward.
Winter gave a sad and small smile.
That is a bad story to tell an amnesiac.
It's the truth.
Is it? Epiphany? You think I am a proxy? Equipment that suddenly gained consciousness and wandered out to this sprawl?
Proxies are human in all but function and cyberware. It isn't that weird for one to gain consciousness.
Oh, I am sure it does happen. Everyone knows that. Even I know that. But if it did happen, their heads explode. That is common knowledge.
Most of the time, true. But it didn't happen to you, and it hasn't happened before, so I should know.
How do you know?
I know.
Scrimshaw closed eyes, squinting them hard. He put down his book and clasped his hands as if he were in prayer, before opening his eyes again, staring into the distance only he could see.
I was a proxy.
Winter sat up straight, staring at Scrimshaw like he was a ghost.
You were a proxy?
I was. Still am in the ways that count, since I can have all these cybernetics without taking immunosuppressants.
He waved his hand and wiggled his fingers, making a metallic clicking noise to illustrate his point.
I was a security proxy. I worked for something that called itself a workers' collective, known as the People's Socialist Democratic Republic of Valen. As a security proxy, my job was to keep everyone safe, but in reality, I was making sure everyone kept to their quota and didn't say anything that the Bureau of Mining deemed too capitalistic.
Winter mentally chewed on Scrimshaw's words. Was he lying to her? Proxies were equipment. Yes, they were human in the most basic sense, but they were built and programmed to do the work that once was done by the machines before they became the enemy of all that was living. Even if their pre-programmed brains suddenly developed intelligence and consciousness, it is absurd that anyone, whether they be government, corporation, or workers' collective, would allow a proxy to wander off in a haze of consciousness, lest they repeat the mistake with the machines.
Nice story. But if you had an epiphany, then why are you still here? Why didn't the overseer at your country activate your insurance?
The same reason why they were so negligent in my maintenance that caused me to have an epiphany, and the same reason they collapsed as all workers' paradises that seek to free themselves from capital do.
Scrimshaw smiled bitterly.
They ran out of capital.
He chuckled at the sick irony of it all.
They couldn't even afford to pull my plug. By the time I had my epiphany, the whole colony was on fire. Miners shouting and chanting. Prefabs were in blazes, gunshots ringing from the other security forces. I simply wandered off. I had no real love for that pit or their ideals. I was not in the business of explaining away the unfairness of it all or being bitter about it. I was like you. I only wanted to go home. I didn't remember much afterwards, but when I came to, I was asking the questions I am sure you have been asking now.
How did you leave the colony?
I found a skycar, flew to another colony on Valen. They thought I was a surviving worker from the PSDRV as news of its collapse had spread. Reactionaries, my former masters called them. But they were kind and were willing to take me in for a while. From there, I have been doing odd jobs, gathering what money I could, and then moving on to the next stop. Stop, start, stop, start, going nowhere in particular. That is, until I have found myself here, and I have found you.
Winter also began to stare at the same distance that Scrimshaw was staring at.
So, what now?
Scrimshaw stood up.
Now I go to work. I suggest you follow me. I guarantee someone will be looking for you, and they will trace your steps back here. There is no better place to get lost in than the crowd.
You're right, of course.
Winter looked down on herself.
And I still have questions that need answering. But these are the drops. And while I don't know much about fashion or local tastes, I know what I'm wearing will only get me to stand out.
I can provide you with some of my duds, but they are cut for men and are in my size. They're going to hang loose if you wear them.
I will look awkward and shabby. Perfect for blending in here, I say.
Scrimshaw gave a low chuckle.
Well, you may have memories in the third person and not know yourself entirely yet, but you've got the attitude to spare. That's good. You're going to need it in this squalor.
Winter knew little, but what she did know was that she immediately disliked the drops as soon as they had left Scrimshaw's flat. The whole place was a tight labyrinth of people who had only a passing familiarity to hygiene, rusting, crumbling architecture, and a grimy stickiness on nearly every surface. Trash was piled on every street corner, and oily posse of sickly and scarred ruffians loitered on every urine and vomit-soaked wall. If anyone decent or sensible was around, they stuck indoors or operated exclusively in the bazaars that had been set up in what was once supposed to be roads. Even the sunlight pouring through the speckled panels of the dome above had an oily essence, no doubt due to those same panels having never been properly cleaned from all the soot and smog from the oil barrel fires. And worst of all was the noise. It wasn't the spirited discussion between normal people and vendors going about their day that disturbed Winter. It was the sound of junkies that everyone had no choice but to grow a tolerance for. At best, they hobbled and moaned like living dead. Others screamed at demons only they could see, scratching at festering wounds, convinced of bugs crawling under their skin and hair. Most were malnourished, as they would forgo meals and warm beds over a hit of whatever fad chemical was being pushed in the back alleys. Winter was not used to seeing people this way. Everyone she knew, or at least had an image of, were all clean, corporate, and immaculate. The image of people in such high numbers, all falling apart, was nauseating.
You don't pity them?
She was following Scrimshaw closely, not allowing herself to be but a few paces behind him.
I don't know what to feel.
Right now, you probably won't be able to feel complex emotions like pity. Your brain most likely hasn't partitioned them yet. It will be a few days before you do. So, if you're concerned if you are some kind of sociopath, don't be.
Will that mean anything? Learning pity in a few days' time.
Not right now. But you will also develop regret at the same time. And when you do, you will look back on all of this. You will feel that the most. So brace yourself, but we can worry about that later. Fear, disgust, anger, happiness. That is the scope for you at the moment.
You base this off your own experience.
Yes, I didn't know this, and because of it, I am now wrapped up in this line of work.
They continued to move through the sea of people. Winter and Scrimshaw's shouted voices reduced to a hushed whisper due to the cacophony around them.
And what work is that exactly?
I'm a debt collector. I was a security proxy, so all I knew coming out was how to scare people and hurt them. And since I didn't get weepy about it, I drew attention from various sorts. I could squeeze money out of people, and that has led me here.
Ah, so you are a leg breaker for loan sharks?
It's a living.
Winter felt nothing. He was right. She has yet to develop complex emotions. Looking back before going outside, there was curiosity and confusion. Understandable, but it had been some time now. She should be more human now, she thought within thought. She knew enough about social interaction that she should be indignant that her Samaritan was a man who hurt those for money. But all she felt at this moment was disgust and annoyance, not at Scrimshaw, but at the people around her. But she also wanted more. In an odd way, she could feel that even this disgust was somehow incomplete. Like the glass in her mind, it permeated what she was seeing and feeling now, extending past her memory. Maybe Scrimshaw is right and she will feel regret at all this. Maybe that will be enough.
Do you feel pity now, even though you do this work?
Scrimshaw's black eyes lowered as they continued to walk.
As I said, it's a living.
They continued moving silently, carefully navigating the crowds. Their own thoughts all of a sudden had become a lot more interesting to themselves. All the while, the two proxies were being carefully watched. It was difficult to do so. They were hardly conspicuous, but the signs were there. They were, compared to the masses surrounding them, far healthier, not so hobbled by malnutrition and venereal disease. But it was Winter's alabaster skin and hair that made her stand out. "There you are, my little turtle dove," thought the man, the so-called little bird who was looking for her. He honestly couldn't believe his luck. His job consisted mostly of watching suits and rich kids making bad deals with worse people, often for the sick thrill due to boredom. It was dull if reliable work, but it paid better than most and he didn't have to break his back or knees doing it. But when word came from the broker that there was some exotic woman in the drops looking to run away from whatever handler had to deal with her and who was worth more money than anything he could make in a decade, he thought he wouldn't have any luck. May as well win the lottery, he thought. But the lottery does have winners, and now it was his turn to hand in his ticket. Carefully, he kept up with them. No issue, their stride was casual, and he had been doing this long enough. 20 meters was the distance he maintained, far enough not to be noticed in the crowd, but close enough not to lose them. Every time the man with the black eyes even so much as tilted his head to look back, he stopped, turned his back, and acted like another stumbling drunk or junkie. Of course, he never touched the stuff, a rare quality that made him an excellent observer. But there were plenty of examples to mimic in the drops. Scrimshaw didn't notice her. Winter was even less aware. As they moved through the crowd, he tapped the nape of his jaw. He clicked his tongue on the roof of his mouth in a coded pattern only the broker would hear.
"I found her. They're going to the Austin Tower."
He clicked the side of his head near his eye, sending what his eyes saw to the broker. Meanwhile, several blocks down, an unassuming man was making an important call to Universal Consumer Holdings' most infamous auditor.